This week on Jerusalem Dateline, the UN adopts an historic resolution to combat Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism. Plus, author Joel Rosenberg examines the #1 threat facing the Jewish state in 2022. Also, the celebration of the baptism of Jesus at the River Jordan, and Jerusalem Rising, the ancient city through a modern lens. All this and more this week on Jerusalem Dateline. Hello and welcome to this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. I'm Chris Mitchell. The United Nations adopted an historic resolution to combat Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism, and it came on the anniversary of one of the darkest days in history. The timely action becomes the first Israeli-sponsored resolution passed by the UN General Assembly in 17 years, and only the second in Israel's history. The resolution, backed by dozens of countries, calls for action to combat Holocaust denial and distortion as anti-Semitism continues to surge globally. A key element calls on social media giants such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter to remove any offensive content of this nature from their platforms. Israel's UN ambassador cited a report showing the failure of social media companies in dealing with complaints over anti-Semitic content, including Facebook, which dealt with only 11% of the posts. Former Israeli ambassador to the UN, Danny Danon, tells CBN News why this resolution is so significant.
Unfortunately, today with social media, we are seeing a wave of anti-Semitism, a wave of Holocaust denial, and I think the fact that the UN General Assembly will adopt a majority resolution saying that all countries should fight Holocaust denial, should educate about the Holocaust. It is very important.
Thursday's vote also came on the 80th anniversary of the Wannsee Conference. That's when the leadership of Nazi Germany decided to implement the final solution, the systematic murder of 6 million Jews.
It's very important, very symbolic that we're passing the resolution actually today. But we have to learn the lesson about the future. When you have radical leaders actually speaking about how they can terminate the Jewish people, we have to take it seriously. So back then it was Nazi Germany. Today the Iranian regime. When you hear the rhetoric, to the threats coming from Tehran, we should not ignore them. We should face them. We should take all the necessary measures to protect ourselves.
The first Israeli resolution supported by UN members came in 2005, designated January 27th as Holocaust Remembrance Day. Danon emphasized today's generation needs to learn about the Holocaust, especially from those who endured it. This week, CBN News sat down with 98-year-old Holocaust survivor Walter Bingham. Later this month is going to be International Holocaust Remembrance Day. What's the lesson that people need to take away?
Never again. Just 2 words, never again. The lesson is never again. Unfortunately, people don't learn.
The positive vote to combat Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism comes just weeks after the UN General Assembly, for the first time in its history, voted to establish a permanent commission of inquiry of one of its member states. Given the UN's long history of resolutions against the Jewish state, you might not be surprised to hear that member state is Israel. The unprecedented UN decision puts Israel under almost perpetual investigation, covering sovereign Israel, the West Bank, and Gaza.
I'm not aware of a commission of inquiry at the Human Rights Council that has been unlimited.
Hillel Neuer, head of UN Watch, says the idea for the commission started during Israel's war with Hamas last May.
You have the UN dedicating millions of dollars to targeting one single country, Israel. And keep in mind, this is not something to support peace, human rights, or justice. This is something to empower Hamas. We've seen it before. Hamas is the first supporter of these commissions of inquiry.
After the Taliban takeover of Afghanistan, the UN held an urgent session, but declined to adopt a commission of inquiry into the Taliban's human rights abuses affecting hundreds of thousands of Afghans. This commission is one of a kind.
It is unlimited in its scope. It has budgeted for millions of dollars. It's unique in that regard. It is going to look both at the hostilities that happened in May, but also at so-called systematic discrimination, which we know for certain, I would say, that they intend to be accusing Israel of the blood libel of apartheid, to accuse Israel alone of being a racist state.
Neuer believes those appointed to the commission expose its bias.
The chair of the inquiry is Navi Pillay. She was the former UN human rights chief. She has said that Israel treats international law with, quote, perpetual disdain. She has also accused Israel of being an apartheid state. So she's meant to be the impartial chair of this inquiry. It's a farce.
The commission must submit a report each year to the Human Rights Council and General Assembly. While the U.S. voted against the resolution, the Biden administration has rejoined the Human Rights Council after the Trump administration pulled out. Neuer says the U.S. has an opportunity.
We hope that they will call out the absurdity of members on the council like Cuba, China, Russia, Venezuela. Most of these countries have never had a single investigation or inquiry. That's wrong. The U.S. needs to take leadership. We need to press our representatives, our presidents, our secretaries of state to speak out and stand up for the right thing.
Tragically, anti-Semitism is growing worldwide, and sadly, there are plenty of incidents that illustrate it, such as the Texas synagogue that was attacked recently. Jenna Browder spoke with former State Department envoy Eli Kohanim about the attack and the government response.
And let's bring in Eli Kohanim, former Deputy Special Envoy to combat anti-Semitism. Eli, great to have you. Welcome. I want to start with the FBI and a statement that it put out on Saturday night. It upset a lot of people. It dismissed essentially concerns of anti-Semitism. The FBI saying that the demands were not specifically related to the Jewish community. What did you make of the statement?
I have to tell you that the incident on Saturday was such a classically anti-Semitic event where you have a radical Islamist entering a synagogue, a place of worship, and holding hostage a rabbi and Jewish worshipers. And so, you know, right there, kind of looking at the facts straight off the bat, it was a little shocking for us to see the FBI not understand this attack immediately as a hate crime, as an anti-Semitic attack. Now, the good news is that the FBI, since that time, has announced that they are investigating it as a terror incident, and they understand that this was a hate crime. What it shows me, Jenna, is that even our law enforcement and our very own FBI, which gathers statistics on hate crimes every year, and the FBI statistics most recently show that Jews are the greatest victims of hate crimes in this country, receiving about 54% of, being the victims of about 54% of all hate crimes that are religiously motivated. What it shows me is that even our own FBI is not as aware and educated and trained on these issues of anti-Semitism as they should be.
Eli, I know you've called for a domestic anti-Semitism SAR in the U.S. even before this attack ever happened. Do you think that this attack has, given this a renewed sense of urgency, or, will push for that harder?
And the reason I wrote that piece in Newsweek back in June is that I served as the deputy envoy to combat anti-Semitism in the State Department. And I always remind people the State Department is like our foreign ministry. So the mandate that I had and the special envoy had is purely a global mandate. So we were there only to be America's voice on global anti-Semitism. And we had no domestic mandate whatsoever. That's by the laws of the United States Congress. And so if we want someone in the United States to be a point person on our domestic anti-Semitism issues, which is something that I did advocate for, then we need a new position to be created. And I very much hope the Biden administration will find motivation following this attack and appoint someone to be a domestic anti-Semitism czar.
Coming up, an interview with author and Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg about the #1 threat facing Israel in 2022. The year 2022 represents a number of challenges to the Jewish state. I spoke with author and Middle East expert Joel Rosenberg in our Jerusalem studio about what he feels is the top threat facing Israel this year.
Well, 2022 is starting off with some very serious threats. right? If you look worldwide, or if you've just started here in Israel, right? Israel is both fighting a war currently and preparing for another. They're fighting the COVID war. The rates, because of Omicron, are off the charts. The highest record numbers every single day of new infections. Fortunately, they all mostly seem more mild, right, as people are seeing around the world. That's the war Israel's fighting today. But they are preparing for a potential mother of all regional wars, and that is a possible preemptive strike on the Iranian nuclear facilities. There's more talk, as you know, as you've been reporting here on CBN, more talk of Israeli military forces preparing for these type of strikes, and a growing sense that there may not be any other way, that Iran shows no interest in cutting a good deal, or maybe any deal, in the Vienna talks. I can't find a single Israeli official that will tell me they have any confidence that the Biden administration would take military action to neutralize the Iranian threat, which is putting an enormous amount of pressure on the Israeli system to get ready. It may have to do it. I hope not.
So as we look forward to 2022, we're left with the legacy of 2021 in the region. One of that is the pullout of the U.S. from Afghanistan, which weakened the U.S., and now we see that Russia is building up forces on the Ukrainian border. How important do you see that development?
The crisis with Russia doesn't immediately affect Israel at the moment, but under Vladimir Putin, he is amassing, we think, upwards of 140,000 Russian troops on the border of Ukraine. And by the way, that's not that far away from the Baltics. The Baltics, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, these are NATO allies under Article 5. If Russia goes in there, then the NATO treaty would be triggered, and the United States and all the rest of the NATO forces would have to go to war with Russia, or the entire NATO system collapse if we don't, rescue those countries. Ukraine is not a NATO ally. Ukraine desperately wants to be a NATO ally, a member of NATO. And the US and the other countries have shown interest in how can we work together. And the Russians, Putin is really drawing the line, saying if Ukraine gets any closer geopolitically, diplomatically, militarily, economically with the West, we're going to invade. They might invade anyway. So this is a huge crisis which doesn't immediately directly affect Israel. Why is it important? It's important because it's a test of Biden. What's happening is because of the failure of Biden to be and look strong in Afghanistan, the fact that he surrendered to the terrorist Taliban regime in Afghanistan means that every other enemy in the world is saying, well, if Biden can't handle the Taliban, what can we do? What could we get? What could we take that we didn't think was possible under Trump or other previous American presidents? What I'm watching right now is the idea that Putin thinks that he can go get part or all of Ukraine, or possibly other countries in Europe, at least look like the strong man in the region and get everyone scared of him. China is threatening the possibility of an invasion and a seizure of Taiwan. Iran is moving towards breakout capacity for nuclear weapons. I mean, if you just took those three, all three of those worst case scenarios, Rosenberg novels, could happen in 2022. That's how dangerous it is right now. That's what happens when an American president displays weakness. This is not the Reagan-Trump peace through strength model. This is weakness begets danger.
Up next, the Greek Orthodox Church celebrates the baptism of Jesus at the River Jordan. Although pandemic restrictions still limit foreign tourism, the number of Christians from Israel and the Palestinian Authority who gathered at the Jordan River to celebrate John's baptism of Jesus this year far exceeded last year's crowd. CBN Middle East correspondent Julie Stahl has that story.
The celebration began with prayers at the Greek Orthodox St. John the Baptist Monastery.
It's the memorial day of the baptism of Jesus Christ.
Then worshipers took the mile-long trek to the Jordan River.
The Patriarch and all the fraternity were coming here in Jordan River and to make the service here as it was before approximately 2,000 years.
This is Qasr al-Yahud. Behind me down below is the Jordan River, and beyond that is the country of Jordan. It's the place where many believe John baptized Jesus, where the children of Israel crossed over into the promised land, and Elijah was carried to heaven in a chariot.
Every year we have more than 15,000 pilgrims from Greece, from Russia, from Romania, from Bulgaria, all the Orthodox countries. But this year, unfortunately, we are only the people that were living here.
Before the pandemic, some 800,000 pilgrims visited the site each year. While only 50 were allowed last year, some 1,700 participated in this year's annual celebration.
This year there were more people than last year because the corona guidelines were expanded, but there was still a smaller amount in relation to previous years.
Known as the land of the monasteries, the area is in biblical Judea and Samaria, also known as the West Bank. While under Israeli security control, both Israelis and Palestinians are welcome to visit.
Qasr al-Yahud, the baptismal place, is a religious site that is open in general to all religions and peoples, to whoever wants to come here without restrictions on religion, race, or gender.
That includes Christian foreign workers who live in Israel, like Sophie.
Today is the best, most wonderful day in the world. I'm happy that I've come here and that I have this opportunity, that there's a church here and I feel well. I thank God for that.
And even some Israelis visited the holy site.
We have 35 amazing Israelis who really are attracted to this beautiful day. First of all, we are lucky. You know, beautiful, the most fantastic weather, and of course this amazing site, which is actually the third holiest site for Christianity in the world, after the Holy Sepulchre and the Church of the Nativity.
Moshe Maoz is a licensed Israeli tour guide.
The fact that Israelis, Jewish Israelis, we are born here, we're educated here. We definitely were exposed to the Bible, and some of us to the New Testament, and here we are in the Holy Land. This is the treasure of the world. This is where everything started. Here we are citizens here. So why not to see the treasure and the beauty of this country?
And Maoz had a message for all those longing to return.
This is the Holy Land, the actual Holy Land of the world, the center of the world. Please come.
Julie Stahl, CBN News, Qasr al-Yahud.
Coming up, Jerusalem Rising, looking at the growth of the ancient city through a modern lens. The book, Jerusalem Rising, takes an historical and prophetic look at the ageless city. The author seeks to tell an ancient story through a modern lens. Author Doug Hershey uses past and current photographs to show the extraordinary transformation of Jerusalem over the past 175 years. The book continues Hershey's unique look at prophecy and the Holy Land.
Much like Israel Rising documented the revival of the land, Jerusalem Rising is documenting the fulfillment of, or at least the beginning processes of these biblical prophecies about Jerusalem being restored and what it's leading to.
Hershey and adventure photographer Eden Ram comb the city for just the right angles to capture its past and present.
Head in, find up top, there he goes. Looking at, you can kind of look through the fence here. It'll look better when you see the actual photos, but some of all of that stuff right in there is what he's getting a shot of from back in the early 1900s.
To be able to go to some of these locations and find the exact locations where a photographer set up 175 years ago to capture what Jerusalem looks like, and then go back today to the exact same location. Some of the oldest photos of Jerusalem ever taken were from 1844, and we have several of those in Jerusalem Rising, and all of those I don't think have ever been recreated ever.
One of those before and after photos takes place here, just outside the Jaffa Gate of Jerusalem's old city walls. It looks back from this spot towards what's known as the Tower of David. Hershey says most any city on earth may look different over the course of 100 years, but Jerusalem is unique.
There's no other city on earth that's had its history foretold, from its destruction to its desolation to a revival as a world player. So to be able to see all of that beginning to unfold in our day is really amazing. And so that's a lot of what's been documented in Jerusalem Rising.
Hershey says some of those prophecies can be seen on the streets here.
In Zechariah 8, God says that he's going to return to the city and he's going to dwell with his people, which is a profound statement for one of the prophets to say, that God's saying, I'm going to return to Jerusalem and dwell with my people. He says that the old men and old women will dwell safely in the streets, leaning on their canes, and the children will be playing in the streets, and the nations will begin to flood to Jerusalem.
And before COVID, Israel set records for tourism.
Never before in history have the nations flooded to Jerusalem the way that they are in our day. And now, clearly in Zechariah 8, it's in the context of coming to worship the King in Jerusalem, but it's undeniable that these are very beginning stages, historically, that we're seeing unfold in the city that have just never happened before.
Hershey says if we want to understand Jerusalem, we must look to the Scriptures.
Ultimately, if we continue reading the Scriptures, if we believe what the prophet said, Jerusalem is going to be a seat of ruling power for a Jewish king. Ezekiel 5:5 says that God has placed Jerusalem in the center of the earth. So locationally, it's already in the center of the earth. And one day soon, and even beginning now, it's already becoming the center of the world's attention.
A city that for thousands of years has stood at the crossroads of history and prophecy.
Jerusalem has been conquered and reconquered multiple times. It's changed hands over 40 times. It's been completely leveled at least twice. There's been literally hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years where the city is just laid desolate, according to eyewitness accounts. Now we're at a time where things are starting to revive. So prophetic words from Zechariah 8 or Isaiah or any of these prophets about Israel, about Jerusalem, where once we thought were allegorical or spiritual or just abstract concepts, we're finding that God is doing exactly what he said. Never before have these prophecies been fulfilled in such a dramatic and significant way, and it's happening in our day in a really powerful and unique way.
It is an amazing city, and now with fewer restrictions on travel, hopefully many more visitors can come to the city. Well, that's all for this edition of Jerusalem Dateline. Thanks for joining us. Remember, you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. And you can also access CBN content through our CBN News and other CBN apps. And don't forget to sign up for our email blast so you can continue to receive all of our exciting CBN content. I'm Chris Mitchell. We'll see you next time on Jerusalem Dateline.